In the waning days of summer 1993, when the air over southern Siberia was still warm enough to carry the scent of pine and wet earth, a small group of kayakers from Ukraine disembarked at Irkutsk with the kind of excitement only a true wilderness journey could bring, their eyes set upon the jagged green silhouettes of the Khamar-Daban Mountains that loomed to the south of the great, brooding expanse of Lake Baikal. Among them was a 17-year-old girl named Valentina Yudichenko, bright-eyed and eager, with a smile that belied the fate that awaited her. The mountains were deceptive, picturesque from afar, their ridges draped in cloud, their valleys cut with streams that sang to no one in particular. But those who had spent seasons here knew their moods could shift with the cruelty of an ambush. The group, led by an experienced instructor named Ludmila, had planned their trek with precision. They would follow a river southward, cross a saddle between two peaks, and descend toward a forested basin where the air was cool and the water ran sweet. Their gear was packed with care: tents, stoves, food supplies, maps annotated in Ludmila's neat handwriting. And for the first few days, the trip was as idyllic as any of them had imagined. The river's glassy surface reflected the blue of an open sky. The banks were rich with ferns and flowers, and at night, they sat around a small camp stove, sipping tea and laughing quietly so as not to disturb the forest. Yet the mountains have a way of noticing trespassers. On the fourth morning, the air tasted different, thicker, with a metallic tang that clung to the back of the throat. The sun was hidden behind a dull, silver haze, and the wind carried with it a faint whistle that seemed to come from nowhere in particular. It was Ludmila who first urged haste, her voice low, as though the mountains themselves might overhear. She claimed the weather was turning faster than expected, that the barometer in her pack had dropped sharply overnight. By midday, the group was climbing into mist, their boots squelching in cold, sodden earth, their breath coming faster as the air thinned. It was here, in this high, cloud-choked pass, that the first hints of unease began to show. One of the younger men, Sasha, complained of a pounding headache. Another, Dennis, lagged behind, his face pale, lips cracked despite the damp air. That night, rain came, not the gentle patter they had known earlier in the journey, but sheets of icy water hurled sideways by a wind that seemed determined to strip them bare. Their tent walls rattled like drums in a funeral procession, and sleep came only in fits, broken by shivers. By morning, 3 more were ill, nausea twisting their stomachs, eyes glassy, movements slow, as if each step required thought. Ludmila tried to rally them, speaking of the ridge ahead, of how once they crossed it, the weather might ease, but the rain had found its rhythm now and would not relent. They pressed on into a world reduced to 2 colors, the slick, dark green of rain-drenched grass and the endless, choking gray of cloud. Conversation dwindled. The only sounds were the squelch of boots, the hiss of rain, and the occasional ragged breath. Then came the first collapse, Nikolai, tall and strong, suddenly dropping to his knees as though the mountain had reached up and cut his strings. They pulled him to his feet, but his legs trembled violently, his words slurred. Minutes later, he vomited into the mud, a thin, yellow bile that steamed faintly in the cold air. Valentina, walking just behind, felt a surge of fear that she tried to bury under the weight of her pack. This was just exhaustion, she told herself, just the strain of the climb. But deep down, something older and more primal whispered that this was only the beginning. The wind screamed that night, a constant howl that set the tent fabric vibrating against their faces, and more fell sick, fevers, cramps, disorientation. Ludmila's reassurances grew shorter, her eyes darting to the shadows between gusts of fog, as though she half expected something to emerge. On the morning of the 6th day, they awoke to find the ground littered with strange debris. Small, feather-like fragments of ice scattered among the grass, each one streaked with a faint reddish hue, as though the mountain had bled in the night. No one spoke of it. They packed in silence, shoulders hunched against the rain, and as they climbed, Valentina began to notice a rhythm to the wind. Long moans punctuated by sharp, breathless pauses, like something breathing through the clouds. She told herself it was just the weather, but she stopped listening after she began to think she could hear words in it, too faint to understand but heavy with intent. The ridge was still miles ahead, yet the group's pace slowed to a crawl. Dennis stumbled often, Sasha muttered under his breath, and Nikolai, though still walking, stared blankly at the ground though he'd forgotten where he was. By late afternoon, the clouds darkened to near night, and a low, rolling thunder began, not above them, but somewhere deep in the earth, vibrating through their boots. Ludmila called a halt, but before they could pitch the tents, Dennis doubled over, screaming, his hands clawing at his own throat as though trying to pull something out. Valentina froze, the cold inside her now deeper than the rain, and it was only Ludmila's sharp command that set them moving again, dragging Dennis under the partial shelter of a boulder. But the damage was done. Fear had taken hold, and the mountain seemed to lean closer, watching. That night, when Valentina finally closed her eyes, she dreamed of black water pooling in the hollows of the earth, of pale faces drifting just beneath its surface, eyes open and unblinking, waiting for the living to join them. She awoke to find Sasha crouched beside her, staring past her shoulder into the fog, whispering something over and over that she could not make out. When she touched his arm, he flinched as though burned, then stood and walked out into the dark without a word. The last thing she heard before sleep claimed her again was the distant crunch of boots fading into the storm. The morning after Sasha vanished into the storm was a muted, gray thing, the world reduced to damp shadows and the muffled hiss of rain on sodden earth. Valentina awoke to find his sleeping mat empty, the indentation of his body still faintly visible, as though he had only just risen. Ludmila searched briefly, her voice carrying across the ridge in short, sharp bursts. But there was no answer, no sign of movement in the fog. The others stood silently, their faces pale, lips trembling either from the cold or from something deeper. Dennis muttered that perhaps Sasha had gone ahead, but no one truly believed it. They set off again, each step a slow act of will, boots sinking into slick mud, shoulders hunched against a wind that now carried with it a faint, sour odor, like rotting vegetation mixed with something metallic. By midday, Victor collapsed, knees buckling as though his bones had softened. When they pulled him up, he stared at Ludmila with a glassy, unfocused gaze and whispered something in a voice so thin it barely reached their ears. "It's calling us." Then he vomited a foul-smelling blackish liquid that steamed on contact with the cold air. Panic rippled through the group, but Ludmila, ever the leader, forced them onward, promising that if they reached the tree line, they could find shelter and perhaps signal for help. The rain thickened, turning to icy needles that stung the skin, and the fog seemed to shift unnaturally, parting only to reveal more featureless gray ahead, closing again behind them like a trap. By late afternoon, Tatiana began to laugh, softly at first, then louder, her voice breaking into high, manic peals that made the hair on Valentina's neck stand up. She stumbled into Victor, clawing at his jacket, shouting something about shapes moving in the mist, about eyes watching from the ridges. When Ludmila tried to calm her, Tatiana's face twisted into a mask of rage, and she shoved the older woman away before collapsing into the mud, convulsing violently. They tried to hold her down, but her limbs jerked with unnatural strength. Foam, pink and frothy, bubbled from her lips before she went limp. No one spoke. They left her there. The silence that followed was worse than the wind, broken only by the ragged gasps of those still moving. Dennis began to sway as he walked, head lolling forward as though the muscles in his neck had given out. Twice he fell, twice they dragged him back to his feet. But on the third fall, he simply lay there, eyes wide, lips moving soundlessly. It was then that the first scream came, a raw, animal sound from somewhere above them, echoing down the slope, impossible to tell whether it belonged to a human or something else entirely. Ludmila barked orders, pushing them into a tight cluster, urging them to move faster. But the terrain was steep and treacherous, rocks slick with rain and moss. Somewhere behind them, another scream, closer this time, ripped through the fog. Valentina's heart hammered in her chest. her breath coming in quick, painful bursts. She glanced back only once and thought she saw a shape in the mist. Tall, thin, with a strange angularity to its limbs, unmoving, watching. She looked away and did not look back again. By nightfall, they found a narrow ledge beneath an overhang of rock and collapsed there too, exhausted to pitch tents, huddling together for warmth. Ludmila kept watch, her eyes scanning the darkness, one hand resting on the handle of the small hatchet she carried. Valentina could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the pale oval of Tatiana's face, her mouth frozen mid-scream, and behind her, something shifting in the fog. Hours passed in that half-aware haze until, just before dawn, a sound rose from the valley below, a low, resonant hum, like wind passing through a hollow bone that swelled and deepened until it vibrated in her ribs. The others stirred, looking around in confusion, but before anyone could speak, Victor let out a strangled cry and lurched his feet, eyes wide with terror, pointing into the mist. Valentina followed his gaze and felt her blood run cold. Not 30 feet away, just visible through the thinning fog, stood a figure, taller than any man, its skin the color of wet stone, its head crowned with antler-like protrusions that dripped with rain. It did not move, yet somehow it was closer each time she blinked, the space between them shrinking in impossible increments. Ludmila shouted for everyone to run, and they stumbled down the slope in blind panic, the fog swallowing their cries, the ground slick and treacherous beneath their boots, each step carrying them deeper into a nightmare that had no shape, no face, only the cold certainty that they were being herded,